staging of a letter to Sobukwe serves as both a tribute to his sacrifices and an indictment of the ongoing struggles faced by our nation. This report aims to articulate the current state of South Africa, reflecting on the challenges we encounter and the strides that we have made since his sacrifices in the fight against apartheid. House of Sachane will be presenting 2 productions at the annual OpenBook Festival, kickstarting with a feature, #Footprints in Nature, by singer and anthropologist Dr Birdie Mboweni, curated by Koketso Sachane. Koketso joins us virtually, and Dr Birdie is in studio with us this morning. Good morning to the both of you, and thank you for making time to be part of these pertinent conversations.
Good morning, and thank you for having us.
Koketso, if you can hear us, I think you're on mute. Perhaps if you could... you can hear us loud and clear. All right, the inspiration behind a letter to Sobukwe, the father of Pan-Africanism, affectionately known as the Prof. Talk to us about what inspired you the most.
I grew up in a country, in a city where, specifically Pretoria, where Pan-Africanism and Black consciousness was at the core. And I grew up knowing of Bob Sobukwe, growing older, reading a bit more, and also as a journalist, as somebody who appreciates history, I went searching for archives, searching for his voice, searching for videos, and you can't find any.
Yep.
And it told a story of how Bob Sobukwe in many ways has, in part, deliberately been written out of history. And I think it is important that we continue to not only shine a spotlight on his name, to elevate his name, to remember him, but also to remind ourselves as to the number of individuals such as himself who have played a tremendous role in having the South Africa that we have today. It is our responsibility to make sure that we keep his name alive.
No, absolutely. I know that there is that quest to find his voice, but the spirit or his essence cannot be silenced, given what he stood for and really what he's done for our history, but for the continent at large. What was unearthed? What did you learn? What did you come to appreciate the most about the Prof?
What I actually appreciated the most was the family man that he is. We read of his philosophies. We read of what he stood for. I mean, it's amazing the conversation had just before us where we honored Patrice Lumumba. Now we're talking about Robert Sobukwe. What for me I connected to is the father, is the husband, is the man, and the pain of loss, the pain of being away from his family. And this is also part of us paying homage to the family, to Mangaliso, to say, we acknowledge your sacrifice, we appreciate the man that you've given to us as a country and as a continent.
I know you alluded to this, but I wondered from your vantage point, and just given the research, do you think we celebrate him enough? And also, if we're going to look at our current trajectory as a country, the state of leadership, what do you think we also need to be taking from him in terms of that to propel us to greater heights, 30 years into our democracy at least?
I think at the core is self-love. As Africans, as Black people, there is a need for us to love ourselves a bit more. We carry a lot of trauma from our past. Even in the present, what we are experiencing is traumatizing us in many ways. It takes us away from who we are. Bob Sobukwe taught us to appreciate, to know who we are, and also, most importantly, to see ourselves as Africans who are part of the continent, which, if you look at what we're dealing with right now as a country, it is the teachings of Bob Sobukwe as a Pan-Africanist that we need to remember and know that we are very much part of this continent.
Absolutely. Dr. Birdie, I want to now bring you into the conversation on the back of what Koketso's echoed, the power of storytelling and just the narratives that are evoked through all of this. Talk to us about how you combine anthropology with music. #Footprints in Nature. How did you fuse the two for yourself?
So, I mean, I've done research in the space of biodiversity conservation for a number of years now, having studied ecotourism. And my interest really, having worked in the biodiversity conservation industry, has just realizing the divide between people and what we call nature, essentially wildlife. And basically, you know, the fencing in of the plants and the animals and keeping people out. And the question that kept arising for me was, but our history tells us otherwise. Our history tells us that our people have been here, our people belonged here, and our people lived here. And they were violently removed from this place. And in post-apartheid South Africa, we need to relook at that. We need to reflect on that history, and we need to look at how people connect with these spaces now and what that means, really. And so this is, and because also I'm an artist, I started writing about our relationships, with these places through songs such as Mvulayana, which means it is raining, and other songs that I've written and that I continue to write.
And it's also important to look at the lens through which we tell these stories. Perhaps you could speak to how this project looks at humanity and really the natural environment, the mismatch that's also occurring at this point. Yeah.
So, I mean, a frequently asked question for me throughout the time that I've worked in, the biodiversity conservation space was, how did you end up here? And this is, a very layered question in South Africa. And it asks the question of, as a young, well, not so young anymore, but, when I started, as a young, but also as a Black woman, how do you end up in this space? Because Black people are seen as to not be interested in studies that have to do with the environment, right? And so, because of that question, and of course I had a lot of stories to tell, having grown up in Bushbuck Ridge, having grown up in communities next to the Kruger National Park, and being introduced to the conservation enterprise at a young age. But my work then is centered around pursuing these stories, pursuing, this indigenous and African knowledge around people's interactions with their environment. And so I sought out, communities that live alongside these places that are called national parks, to hear their history with these places, to hear the connections to these places, spiritual connections, affective connections, and ongoing, tensions, post-apartheid tensions around issues of belonging in these places. Issues of land claims came up quite a lot. Issues of human-wildlife interactions or human-wildlife conflict, as some refer to it as. And so many of these stories came out, and I think my work really is about communicating those stories, giving, really centering our indigenous knowledge, which has been erased for such a long time.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're sons and daughters of the soil. There's absolutely no way that we cannot be connected to the land and to finding our space, exerting our agency as well.
Absolutely.
In all of this. I wonder on the issue of identity and belonging, how you fuse art and activism as well, given some of the challenges that would have also come through as a result of your work.
Oh man, there are so many issues around the issue of belonging, my own belonging in place, my own belonging in South Africa. And in fact, a number of years ago, 2022, I released a song titled I Am Here, which talks about how I feel about belonging in South Africa and my experience of belonging or non-belonging in South Africa, where in a lot of spaces being asked, how did you end up here as a Black South African, as a Black South African? And so I speak about those issues of belonging, not only in my research, but also in my work as an artist.
Koketso, let me bring you back into the conversation. I mean, we're called many things, but it's about what we answer to. And given the social, political constructs as well, that society tries to box us in, I mean, this was often questioned by Sobukwe, by Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe in his works, perhaps moving from the notion of divide and conquering to uniting us all, hence Pan-Africanism as well. Talk to us about that vision. Are we edging closer? What more needs to be done to realize that at large?
I wish I could give good news and say that we are edging closer, but if anything, because of the amount of work that still needs to be done by ourselves as Black people in terms of our connection to self, and most importantly, unity. We're not as united as we should be, and it makes me sad. And fortunately, what we can do is remind ourselves, and the best way that we can remind ourselves is by connecting to our history, connecting to people like Babu Sobukwe and his teachings, what he stood for. Go back to the conversation had before we entered, the legacy of Patrice Lumumba. We have the history, we have the knowledge. Unity is the only thing amongst us as Black people in specifically, but of course broader society. But the only way that we can deal with some of the challenges that we have is through unity and reminding ourselves. And this is what we're hoping to do with Letter to Sobukwe as a contribution to many others who in their own spaces and ways understand the need for unity, understand the need for us to be able to deal with the challenges that we have in the country and continue to honor the legacies of people like Bab Sobukwe.
No, absolutely. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and it's about which footprints are we going to follow? Which path are we also going to take? We have run out of time. I know the conversation's not over. Obviously, Open Book Fest is happening, and this will be showcased. So we'll leave it there. And thank you to the both of you for joining us and for interacting with us. Curator Koketso Sachane, singer anthropologist Birdie Mboweni, chatting to us about Open Book Festival 2024 happening from the 6th of September in Cape Town. And of course, their two latest offerings.